Hello and welcome everyone to this free Friday webinar. As usual, we know that people keep coming in, but we will start sharp as we only have 30 minutes. So the webinar is automatically captioned. Please use the CC button in Zoom to get the captions. And as always, the webinar is recorded and will be published on our YouTube channel. Your microphone is muted, and that is just to avoid any background noise. And we will follow our usual pattern with a short presentation, and then there will be a Q&A. So you can ask your questions using the Q&A function at any time during the webinar. And my colleague Stefan is monitoring the chat for any technical issues, and we'll also be sharing links in the chat. So today we're going to talk about AI in recruitment, and we have a very special guest, a guest star, I would say, today with us, but you will have to wait a little before you get to listen to him. But with me today, I have Alejandro Moledo, who is the Deputy Director and Head of Policy at the European Disability Forum. And I'm very happy that he will share EDF's, or the European Disability Forum's, views and thoughts on AI and recruitment, and AI, I think, in general, from the end user perspective of all the organizations representing persons with disabilities in Europe, because that is adding even more relevant information to what we can present today. My name is Susanna Loren. I'm the Managing Director and Chair of the Funka Foundation, and I'm also chairing the joint technical body on e-accessibility for ETSI, CEN, and CENELEC. So the standardization organizations in Europe that are mandated by the Commission to make sure that we have standards to support the European Accessibility Act. And I'm also the G3ICT and IAAP representative to the EU. So today I'm going to talk about AI. So I think we have around 275 people registered for today. So there are still people who are not too fed up with talking about or listening to people talking about AI. But I think it's difficult when you find there are still very many important and relevant things to talk about, but the topic as such has already become a little bit worn out, or it's too much hype around it. So excuse me if you have heard everything that I'm going to say today before, but I'm sure what Alejandro will share is new and fresh. So in many accessibility events and conferences and webinars and meetups during the last couple, 3, 4 maybe years, there has been a lot of talk about the potential of artificial intelligence and also the risks. So I think we all know that a lot of interesting things are happening and the technology is moving extremely fast. It's all very fascinating, and more of us are also trying to do things with AI, and it's now possible to code even without really understanding code and so on. So there's a lot of exciting things happening, and at the same time, also, there is quite a lot of worry about what happens with this when the technology moves this fast, and especially for minority groups or vulnerable groups. And also, I think a little bit just the loss of control, which may always be the case when technology is moving fast forward. We have looked at several different things when it comes to the AI. We did a study for the European Commission last year, and we have also looked into the more technical sides when looking at how whether you can use AI to support content creators to write plain language and easy to read with the help of AI. That was quite early, and we didn't get super good results. It was actually easier to make it write easy to read than plain language at that time. And now many other research projects and studies have done similar things, and also with a broader and wider result than this. But there are some parts of AI where we find it especially interesting to dig deeper into what is happening from the disability community point of view. And one of these topics that we have tried to look into more in depth is recruitment, which is of course important because no matter how the economy goes up and down, the number or the percentage of people with disabilities that are outside of the ordinary labor market is still high, and not in a good way, but much higher than it should be. So we wanted to do a project on AI in recruitment, and we got funding from the Norwegian Directorate for Family, Youth and Children, I think is the name of them, Bufdir. So that's a Norwegian authority that do many important things, but one of their strands is also to provide research funding for things that have to do with disabilities and other things, but also specifically one on what the Norwegians call universal design, but what they actually mean is accessibility, but that's another discussion. So this is a small project. We only had 8 months from start to end, and we finalized the project by the end of, or just before Christmas, actually, last year. And now the report is out again. So what we did was focusing on both the AI tools, so the actual technology that is used while recruiting, and also the methodology, the procedures, and kind of the human part, how the tools are used in the recruitment processes. So kind of both the technical and human side of things. We, of course, looked at the accessibility of the actual tools, but we were even more interested in kind of the inclusiveness, or the way tools and the technology is used in a way that it could possibly support people with disabilities to make it easier to recruit persons with disabilities, or make it facilitating for people with disabilities to come into the labor market. And of course, the risks and biases of all of this. So we had two types of stakeholders here that we worked together with and also interviewed, and that was recruiters, employers, staffing companies, HR, all of these people who work in recruiting people. And then the other part was, of course, persons with disabilities who either are right now candidates for a job, or have recently been in that position, or who have been maybe for a long time tried to get a job and could also see what happened earlier, or how the tools were used and how that has evolved over the years, and what difference AI may have made. And because it's funded in Norway, this is a national funding instrument. So everything I say, all the results, and everyone we talk to is basically mostly based on what has happened in Norway, and our focus has been on Norwegian stakeholders. So the whole implementation of this project was, first of all, we looked at what have others done. So we are not reinventing anything here, a wheel or so. We want to base all our research on other good research results. So we started out with a literature study, looking at what others have done, and that was, of course, worldwide, not only Norwegian. And then we did a survey to all these different stakeholders that we wanted to talk to. And then we selected a number of people that we did interviews with, and then we collected all this material, did a summary, and also an analysis of kind of the current situation as far as we can see how AI tools are used in recruitment in Norway in 2025. And based on that analysis, we created guidelines. So those guidelines are made for people who are recruiting right now, and also a checklist that can be used in a more day-to-day work when remembering how to use AI in a good way. And those are right now only in Norwegian, but if there is an interest of it, we may also consider translating them and publishing them in other languages. But right now, the focus is to have this in Norwegian. And we could see some common issues, things that are repeated over and over again. So, for example, when we talk to the employers and people who are actually working professionally with recruiting, they all said, yes, we are using AI tools, many different AI tools, and in different parts of the recruitment process. And many of them claimed to know what they're doing and be very kind of aware of risks and so on. But as soon as we started to ask more detailed questions or scratch a little bit on the surface, we could see that there is quite a big lack of guidelines. So people who are maybe the person who procured this tool or even developed the tool has a very clear idea of what it can do and what it cannot do. But the people who are actually using the tool and in the everyday work, they do not really have guidelines on what is suitable to do and where are the limitations of this tool, what can it not do. So there is a big lack of guidelines in many places. There is also, specifically in the larger organizations, quite a wide gap between the policy, everything on paper, in theory, that looks very good. They all have requirements for accessibility and they know very much exactly how to do things with AI. But then when we look at how it is used in reality and what is actually happened in the different processes of recruitment, then we can see quite a big gap there. We could also see that there is a lack of understanding when it comes to kind of how AI works. And I'm not pretending that I understand the nitty-gritty details of that, but really the connection between what the AI tool is, what data it's based on, if it's our own data in our organization or if it's somebody else's, a big tech company maybe tool or something open. And what that means for the result of the recommendations that the AI tool is providing. So if you only train it on one specific type of roles or gender or what do I know, abilities, then how that actually converts into the recommendations that the tool will give you. So that connection was sometimes or quite often not clear to people. They thought that the AI tool would make it, the automation would not only make it more efficient and smooth to select candidates and so on, but they also thought that it actually was less biased than what a human would have been. And we can, of course, clearly see that that's not the case. And a little bit depressing also was that many of the tools that are presented to the candidates, so we didn't really look at the accessibility of the tools themselves, so the recruiters, whether they have a disability, that was not part of this project, but the candidates, when there is an interface where you do the some kind of exercise or you send in things or it's a video conference interview tool and so on, that the accessibility aspects that these big organizations have covered in many other places in their digital interfaces, this is completely missing when they are using these third-party AI tools. So it seems to be a bit separated from their maybe information and communication department. These things are happening somewhere else where it seems to us at least that the understanding and knowledge about accessibility is not as high as in the other pieces. So, and I'm showing a picture that is supposed to be blurred, so don't be frustrated if you can't see what it is on the photo. So all of this led us to some general advice. So there's a long guideline and a short checklist. As I said, many of the things you will have seen before if you have read similar reports on AI. But what we say is that it's really important to have a strategy when you start using AI tools, so you know what the goal is and you also know where the pitfalls are, and really to have very solid requirements on the data that the AI tool is trained on and also how it is used. We also believe that it's very important to be transparent towards the candidates so that I know if I'm part of this process that I will be selected or not selected partly based on AI. And of course, there's always a need for training. Let's get back to that. But here, I really think that people using these tools many of them do not really understand the limitations of them. And that is, of course, a matureness that is comes with all kind of new technology, still a little bit new to many of us, this. Another recurring recommendation is, of course, to not make everything 100% automatic, because we do not really understand yet what AI is doing, and it's still not really reliable. So just to always remember to have a human in the loop is just as important in recruitment as in any other part of society where we use AI these days. And we are also having a reflection or discussion on on the different roles and responsibilities. So who is responsible if something goes wrong? Who is responsible for doing the follow-up, and to make sure that you learn from the processes that the AI tool is used in, and then make sure to make updates and kind of improve in the future. Because a handful of the people we talked to, they had tools that they have created on their own. So large enough organizations that actually develop things, but most of them, specifically small and medium-sized companies, are working with someone else's tool and therefore maybe also someone else's data. And it's really important to keep improving the results. So this, of course, moving forward. What we didn't really get so far, in as far as we would have liked to in this project, was to get really solid information from end users with disabilities. We talked to quite a few and also got survey results from them. But we realized quite soon that many of the candidates did not know whether AI had been involved or not, did not notice any difference whether AI has been involved, or as far as they knew, if AI was involved or not. Some of them was very kind of confused by the whole idea of AI and how that can be used and so on. So we didn't get as much really tangible results from the end user side as we would have hoped to get in this project. And therefore, it's also even more important that we have today Alejandro with us, who wasn't part of the project, but where EDF has done a lot of work on AI from their perspective. So I think this was my yes. So I will stop sharing and give the floor to Alejandro, and please let us know all the important things now.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Susanna. I don't come with fresh and new insights on artificial intelligence. I mean, for just a brief introduction, I believe many people will know about EDF. We are the umbrella organization representing persons with disabilities, and as Susanna mentioned, we have been working for the past years very intensively on AI, particularly on the regulation that the European Union has adopted concerning AI. So I will go into that in a moment. I'm saying that I don't come with any new or any fresh insight, because when we talk about AI, as Susanna also mentioned, we always need to stress the opportunities and the risks. So as any technology is double-edged, so in the case of AI, it's even greater, both the opportunities and the risks, because the technology is really being embedded in many other technologies that we use in our everyday lives. So the opportunities, you all know very well, Susanna has mentioned the possibilities to enhance the accessibility for persons with disabilities, to facilitate the creation of accessibility content, the easier access for many persons with disabilities to information and to certain ICT tools. But the risks are there, and the risks are indeed related to bias and discrimination, because people with disabilities, because of us being such as heterogeneous group, we are always in the margins of the data sets of those AI systems that operate based on the average users, and we are not the average user for obvious reasons, and we are very different from each other. So what we see, and the AI tools in recruitment is one very clear example of this kind of risks, is that many companies are just jumping, companies and public authorities are just jumping into these technologies without any kind of ethical consideration, or without any strategy, as Susanna mentioned, or any internal policy when it comes to AI tools. What we've done, and then the AI developers are not testing sufficiently on how their tools and their algorithms work as for this potential bias to certain populations, such as persons with disabilities. So as I mentioned, I don't want to be too long to allow for some discussions. EDF, we have been focusing very much on the hard legislation because we, as we saw with web accessibility and accessibility in general, commitments never work. So we did focus very much on influencing the regulation that the EU has adopted, which is called the AI Act. It's a very thorough and complex regulation. Good thing is that this is a regulation, meaning that in all of the EU countries, this will come as it is adopted. So there is no room for much interpretation by our national authorities. And what we have developed, which I encourage you all to take a look at, is a guide for the implementation of this act. The guide goes into explaining the different provisions and goes into also how you as an individual or you as an organization of persons with disabilities can use the current legal framework to seek for redress and to really understand what are the elements that the companies and public administrations that procure AI tools and the AI developers need to follow. In the case of employment, in the case of tools that are for employment, such as recruitment tools, these are categorized as high risk AI, because what the legislation does is basically to distinguish between unacceptable risks. So these are kind of AI systems that are totally forbidden. And then different categories of risk, high risk and lower risks. For tools related to employment, such as recruitment tools, these fall under high risk AI. And for this, there are requirements such as testing the bias of these tools and accessibility for persons with disabilities. These were not in the Commission's proposals, but thanks to the advocacy of our members and EDF, we managed to get these requirements into the final legislation. There is also the requirement, for example, to carry out a fundamental rights impact assessment. But for this, for example, the Commission has not yet published a template to guide this particular provision. So at the legislative front, let's say, things are moving, although there is also backlash, because at the moment we have seen recently that the Commission is putting forward simplification proposals. So basically to weaken some of the provisions of these regulations, including the Artificial Intelligence Act. So nothing is from granted, and we should keep defending what we have achieved so far. Something that I'd like to mention, and I will come to a conclusion, is that in addition, so the disability movement and persons with disabilities, we must build our capacity on AI as individuals, as organizations, and also as citizens vis-a-vis what we have as for the legislation on how to claim our rights. So that's why I was insisting that the toolkit or the guide, as we call it now, is very useful because it goes into what do you do if you find out that you have been discriminated based on your disability by an AI system used by your city hall or by a ministry. So the guide guides you into how you can claim your rights. Beyond that, we, persons with disabilities, we need to empower ourselves with AI. And for this, we at EDF, we have also started recently a project in which we want to create materials to facilitate the use of AI tools by organizations of persons with disabilities and by people with disabilities themselves. And lastly, I would very much recommend you to sign up for our newsletter on AI disability, because I'm by no means the expert on this topic. We do have a colleague who is really a freak, if I can say so, because he's really, really good at AI, and he follows all developments, and he's the one that is putting together this newsletter highlighting interesting examples and studies and recommendations on AI and the intersection with disability. So I would recommend you all to follow that as well. So I'm sorry, Susanna, but I don't think I said anything new or revolutionary.
Thank you. Thank you, Alejandro. It was very good. Thank you. And please, Stefan, if you could post the links to the resources that Alejandro mentioned, that would be very good. So we have a couple of questions here. Are these AI, so for the Norwegian project, are these AI tools the problem is when new things come in, then it jumps. Are these AI tools American or European? If both used, were there a difference? I cannot tell. We didn't look at them. We didn't. So for all of them that we interview, we don't know exactly the tool, and we did not ask. But that's a very good question. Let me get back to that and see if I can detect something on that. It would be interesting to see. But I think many of the ones, I mean, either you build them yourself or I believe many of them were US based, but I really cannot say. We did not ask about that in the project. But thank you, very good comment. And then we have a couple of people saying that there is interest in a English translation. Okay, thank you. So we will consider that. Just need to have a little bit more time and resources. And then there's a question for Alejandro. It's long. Are persons with disabilities among your members and others using AI in their everyday life while studying at work, etc.? And in that case, how or what? Is there a difference between persons with disabilities and the general population? Oh, that's a lot of questions for once, but
Can you recap the question, Susanna?
so are your members using AI in their everyday life, studying, working, and so on? Do you know anything about that? Is it you?
Well, I believe we are all using AI in one way or another, even from the very basic now, as we see, very basic automatic captioning to more complex AI systems. And we have seen, for example, also candidates with disabilities applying for jobs at EDF, in which we notice that, or we feel that, for example, their motivation letter, for example, or their CV has been also supported or drafted using AI tools as well. So at EDF, we are trying to use as well AI, and I believe many of our members as well, to facilitate the content that we produce in an accessible manner, to support our work and being more efficient as well. So we shouldn't also miss those opportunities as well for those that are, those AI systems that are not high risk. So we are not using, for example, a recruitment AI system, for example.
Thank you. And I think we had an event last week in Dublin where we had a person with dyslexia in one of the panels who said that the AI tools that she can use for speaking into the computer and making sure that she knows spell right and gets summaries and so on, that has helped her immensely in studying and working and so on. I think there are specific groups that really are very keen on using AI, also the kind of the everyday tools, ChatGPT
Yeah.
and similar things. So we see a lot of examples of that. But otherwise, I would say people with disabilities use AI just as much as whatever the other group is that I still don't understand who would be the people without disabilities. But I think we all are in the same boat. So yes. Yeah, surely these tools being benchmarked or evaluated or compared with controlled user profiles data to check if they have a bias for different disabilities. Yeah, I hope so. But really, to be honest, by some of the interviews we did, it felt like the people procuring systems, they were very unaware. But of course, they should be, and I hope they are. And I think serious big companies are selling things that are good. But it seems to me, and I cannot prove this, of course, I don't know. But the unawareness and the lack of awareness was a little bit depressing in this project. We could see that people thought they knew, but when we asked more in detail, it was clear that they did not know exactly what the risks were for this kind of biases.
Yeah. The problem is that I think, sorry, Susan, the problem is
Oh.
I think that they just go for a tool that promise to reduce costs without taking into consideration other elements as well. So that's why it's important to have an internal policy, a strategy on the use of these kind of AI systems.
Yeah, true. It's the same that we see in accessibility.
There you
Sometimes
go.
you get a
Yeah.
very good offer of something that will solve everything with just one button. And if it sounds too good to be true, then it may
Yeah.
be too good to be true. So we have to wrap up because this is one of our really short ones. So I will go back to my presentation if I can find that and just make sure that I show this. So do subscribe not only to EDF's newsletter, but also to our newsletter. So we will have a link in the chat and also a QR code here. You can also follow us on LinkedIn if you want to know what is happening in our businesses. And next Free Friday webinar is with our brilliant UX designer colleague Malin Hammarberg, who will speak about the InDesign styles and unlocking the accessibility potential of InDesign. So that is more focusing on how to make sure that design templates and design objects and all of that becomes accessible by default. So do not miss that. That is in 2 weeks on the 27th of February, same time, same channel. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you to Alejandro for being with us today. Always good to have you on board, and to Stefan for managing the technology here. Have a very good day, rest of your day, everyone, and don't forget to make something accessible before you put your computer away for the weekend. Bye bye.
Bye bye.